Now, I realize that Christmas was Friday, and it's Sunday. And we're still singing Christmas carols, and I'm fine with that. I like them too. But I'm preaching from the lectionary. And the lectionary for today says that we're going to preach Luke 2, verses 41 through 52. And I got to tell you, in that lectionary reading, Jesus is 12. So just to prepare you. Things move quickly in the church lectionary. Luke chapter 2, verses 41 through 52. The screen will have the NRSV version. I'm reading from Peterson's The Message. Every year, Jesus' parents traveled to Jerusalem for the feast of Passover. When he was 12 years old, they went up as they always did for the feast. When it was over and they left for home, the child Jesus stayed behind in Jerusalem, but his parents didn't know it. Thinking he was somewhere in the company of pilgrims, they journeyed for a whole day and then began looking for him among relatives and friends. When they didn't find him, they went back to Jerusalem looking for him. The next day, they found him in the temple, seated among the teachers, listening to them and asking questions. The teachers were quite taken with him, impressed with the sharpness of his answers, but his parents were not impressed. They were upset and hurt. His mother said, "Young man, why have you done this to us? Your father and I have been half out of our minds looking for you." He said, "Why were you looking for me? Didn't you know that I had to be here dealing with the things of my Father?" But they had no idea what he was talking about. So he went back to Nazareth with them and lived obediently with them. His mother held these things dearly, deep within herself. And Jesus matured, growing up in both body and spirit, blessed by both God and people. The words of God for the people of God. On Monday of this past week, I was one of the masses traveling through airports in Portland, Maine, Detroit, and Atlanta, trying to get back to here. Depending upon how you look at it, in consideration of the distance between terminals, I was one of the lucky ones, traveling in a wheelchair. It gave me the freedom to observe others as we all hurried to get to the right terminals and gates. I was particularly aware of mothers who were carrying a baby while a 3 or 4-year-old child struggled to keep up, generally slightly behind. Moms were uniformly glancing down every 15 or 20 seconds to make sure that the little one was still behind her. Now, the mom and the grandmom in me wanted to stop those moms and say, "Wait, you need to have eyes on those little ones all the time. Little ones can stop. They can wander away. Worse, somebody could scoop them up in that 15 seconds of time and be off with them, and you wouldn't even know it." The airport is not a caravan where there are other friends and relatives keeping watch over your children for you. Now, also in the airport, there were an abundance of preteens and teenagers, most of them with earbuds and cords coming out of their ears. And once on the planes, that was even more apparent as the attendants noted there were many electronic devices aboard, kids and adults. They all had to be turned completely off. In the airport, kids of that age moved about more freely. Parents were nearby. They were trusting that the kids were capable of keeping up. I didn't have any internal alarms go off about those. I thought back to when my grandson was that age, and I had some comfort that they were okay with controlled independence. The scripture lesson today from Luke is the only story about Jesus as a boy. In just a few short calendar days, we've gone from the birth of Jesus to Jesus at 12. About the same pace as 2009 has gone by. It was safer in those days to make a trip from Nazareth to Jerusalem in a caravan than it was as individual families. They were protected more from bandits on the road. A large group didn't have nearly the risk that Mary and Joseph and Jesus might have had if they were traveling alone. In that large group, Jesus, just as the teens in the airport, would likely have gravitated toward his friends in the caravan instead of hanging out with his parents, just as the kids in the airport gravitated toward their friends that they were traveling with than hanging out with their parents. After Passover, in a large crowd of people gathering to return home, Joseph and Mary would have expected their nearly mature son to be at the appointed place for the departure of the caravan. They'd also expect he'd be among the same group he'd spent most of the 3-day journey to Jerusalem with, that is, his friends. And they wouldn't worry about him. However, he wasn't there. After a day of traveling, a day of searching among the caravan, and a day traveling back to Jerusalem, Mary and Joseph found Jesus in the temple. He'd spent those 3 extra days in the temple completely oblivious to the fact that the caravan had even left. He was so engrossed. It reminds me of the concentration that my grandson could have with Legos when he was younger and now has when he's sitting at the computer. And that might remind you of kids that you know. Here come Mary and Joseph into the temple. They're tired, they're worried, they're angry, and they're torn between wanting to hug this child that's been missing and wanting to throttle him for the inconvenience that he's caused them. Jesus has been sitting with the teachers. He's been hearing lots of affirmations about his answers, about the questions he's been asking. And Mary speaks, and she scolds him soundly. "Young man, why have you done this to us? Your father and I have been searching for you, and we're half out of our mind." Now, the answer that Jesus provided to this scolding confused his parents in the same way that parents today are confused often by what their preteens and adolescents say to them. Here's Jesus, and he's saying, "Why are you looking for me?" Now, Mary's trying to think logically to herself, because you've been missing for 3 days?